Let me start with something uncomfortable. If you work hard, save money, stay disciplined, and do everything society told you to do, there is still a very high chance you will never become wealthy. Not comfortable, not stable, wealthy. And here's the shocking part. Some of the hardest working people in the world today live in Africa. Some of the most resourceful live here. Some of the most resilient, creative, and determined minds live here. Yet globally, Africans only control a tiny fraction of the world's wealth. So let me ask you something. If effort alone created wealth, wouldn't Africa be one of the richest places on earth? That question alone should disturb you because it means something deeper is happening, something structural, something psychological, something cultural, something invisible but extremely powerful. My name is Tim. I'm the leader of the Wealth Team. On this channel, we're on a mission to raise thousands of African millionaires before the next 1 year. Subscribe and be a part of this journey and have the chance of being among the thousands. Now, today we are going to uncover the real forces quietly preventing millions of Africans from building wealth, even when they are intelligent, hardworking, and ambitious. And pay attention carefully, because one of these forces is so normal, so socially accepted, that most people don't even recognize it as a financial trap. Let's begin with the first, and perhaps the most dangerous, survival mode mentality. Most Africans are not planning wealth. They are managing survival, rent, food, transport, school fees, medical bills, family obligations, emergencies that appear without warning. Life becomes a continuous cycle of urgent needs. When the brain is constantly solving immediate problems, it cannot design long-term strategies. This is not a motivational quote. This is neuroscience. Researchers have found that scarcity reduces cognitive capacity. When resources are limited, the mind narrows its focus to immediate survival. Long-term thinking literally becomes harder, not emotionally harder, mentally harder. So what happens? People become reactive instead of strategic. Short-term decisions replace long-term planning. Security becomes more important than growth. And slowly, something subtle happens. Survival stops being a temporary phase and becomes a permanent lifestyle. But here's something most people never realize. Survival mode does not just reduce income potential, it reshapes identity. You begin to see stability as success. You begin to fear disruption. You begin to protect what little you have instead of building what you could have. And once the mind accepts survival as normal, wealth begins to feel unrealistic. But survival mentality alone is not the biggest trap. There is something even more powerful, something deeply embedded in African social life, something most people call responsibility, but financially it behaves like gravity. This takes us to number 2, the black tax trap. Let's talk about the obligation that silently redistributes income across generations, the black tax. If you are financially stable, you support others. If you get a good job, you help extended family. If you start earning more, expectations grow. On the surface, this looks noble, compassionate, cultural, moral, and it is. But financially, it creates a structural challenge that many people underestimate. Wealth building depends on capital accumulation, capital that stays invested, capital that compounds, capital that grows uninterrupted over time. But when income constantly flows outward, capital never stabilizes long enough to grow. Imagine trying to fill a bucket with water while there are multiple holes at the bottom. No matter how much you pour in, it never fills. Now here's the question most Africans are afraid to ask. Can collective responsibility and individual wealth building coexist sustainably? That tension sits at the center of many African financial journeys. Because unlike societies where individuals accumulate wealth first and redistribute later, many Africans redistribute before accumulation even begins. And the psychological weight is enormous. You are not just managing your financial future, you are managing multiple futures simultaneously. But the black tax is not just economic, it's emotional. Guilt prevents boundaries. Love prevents financial discipline. Social expectations prevent strategic decisions. And because saying no feels morally wrong, people quietly sacrifice long-term wealth for short-term relief. But even this is not the most misunderstood financial barrier. There is something else, something far more subtle, something many people will strongly disagree with, something that shapes financial behavior at a deep psychological level. The prayer versus profit delusion. I know this will turn many people off and they may stop watching, but trust me, you need to watch this. Let me say something sensitive but important. Faith is powerful. Spirituality is meaningful. Belief provides strength, hope, and resilience. But there is a dangerous financial distortion that sometimes appears when spiritual expectation replaces strategic action. The belief that divine intervention will substitute for economic planning. People pray for breakthrough but avoid financial education. People fast for prosperity but avoid investment risks. People expect miracles but resist systems. Hope becomes a substitute for structure, but wealth historically follows patterns. Investment patterns, market patterns, behavior patterns. Faith without financial strategy does not produce wealth. It produces expectation. And expectation without execution creates long cycles of waiting without movement. But this is where the deeper psychological shift happens. When outcomes are attributed entirely to spiritual timing, personal financial responsibility weakens. Planning feels less urgent. Learning feels optional. Risk feels unnecessary. But here's the question that changes everything. What if faith is meant to support disciplined action, not replace it? What comes next explains why many people who earn good money still never become wealthy. 4. The consumerism paradox. Looking rich versus being rich. In many societies, wealth is measured privately. In many African environments, status signals matter. Clothing, phones, cars, event appearances, celebrations. There is intense social pressure to look successful, even before financial stability exists. And here is the paradox. The moment income rises, lifestyle rises faster. Economists call this lifestyle inflation, but socially it feels like progress. Recognition, respect, visibility. Yet financially something dangerous happens. Money that could become capital becomes consumption. Assets that could produce income are delayed, while symbols that display success are prioritized. And here is a shocking financial pattern observed globally. Many people with high incomes remain financially fragile because their expenses rise at the same speed as earnings. They look wealthy but remain economically vulnerable. Now ask yourself something honestly. If social recognition disappeared tomorrow, would your spending habits change? That question reveals whether financial decisions are driven by strategy or by perception. But even disciplined savers face a force beyond personal behavior, a force that silently erodes wealth regardless of effort. Most people feel it but cannot fully explain it. That's what number 5 is all about, the systemic barrier, the currency ghost. Imagine saving money consistently for years. You avoid unnecessary spending. You remain disciplined. You accumulate capital slowly. Then inflation rises sharply. Currency value drops. Purchasing power declines. Suddenly, your savings buy far less than before. No mistake, no bad decisions, no reckless behavior, just economic erosion. This is the currency ghost. Unstable currencies, inflation, volatility, and limited access to global investment channels create structural barriers to wealth preservation. Even disciplined savers lose ground. And here's the deeper issue. Many people are taught how to earn money, but not how to protect it from macroeconomic forces, currency risk, inflation risk, policy risk. These are invisible threats to long-term wealth accumulation. And if money cannot hold value reliably, building wealth becomes exponentially harder. But economic systems alone do not explain everything, because even in unstable environments, some people still take bold financial steps, others remain frozen. Which leads us to the next barrier. But before then, if you are still here, you are ready to change your financial future. Now I want you to comment, breaking chains, because we are breaking free from this captivity. Now make sure you watch the end. Let's go to number 6. Fear of risk, the price of playing it safe. Risk is uncomfortable everywhere in the world, but in environments where failure has serious long-term consequences, risk does not just feel uncomfortable, it feels dangerous. In many African economies, one failed decision can trigger a chain of reaction that takes years to recover from. There are limited safety nets, limited access to affordable credit, limited institutional support for second chances. If a business fails, there is rarely structured recovery. If an investment goes wrong, there is rarely protection. If income stops, expenses do not pause. So people learn, not consciously but emotionally, to avoid uncertainty. They choose predictability. They choose stability. They choose what feels safe, even when safe quietly means staying exactly where they are for the next 10, 20, or 30 years. And this is where the silent trade-off happens. Security today in exchange for limitation tomorrow. But here's the historical reality of wealth creation across the world. Every meaningful financial breakthrough required stepping into uncertainty, starting a business when success was not guaranteed, investing money when outcomes were unknown, entering markets that could rise or collapse. Wealth rarely emerges from perfect certainty. It emerges from calculated exposure to uncertainty. And that word matters, calculated. Because most people do not actually fear risk itself. They fear unpredictable risk. Risk they do not understand. Risk they cannot measure. Risk they cannot control. When outcome feels random, fear intensifies. When rules are unclear, hesitation grows. So what looks like lack of courage is often something else entirely. Lack of information, lack of clarity, lack of understanding. When people cannot explain how something works, they assume the worst. And when fear becomes the default response to opportunity, progress slows to a crawl. But here's the deeper paradox. Avoiding risk feels responsible, yet over long periods of time, it can quietly guarantee financial stagnation. Because the biggest financial risk in many developing economies is not taking risk at all. Safety becomes a long, slow form of economic erosion. But this raises an important question. Why do so many intelligent, capable people feel unprepared to evaluate risk properly in the first place? Why do uncertainty feel so overwhelming? And the answer lies in something rarely discussed openly. Not motivation, not discipline, not ambition, but education. This is number 7, the education gap nobody talks about. Most education system prepares people to earn money. Very few prepare people to understand money. From early schooling to university graduation, the focus is clear. Pass exams, acquire credentials, qualify for employment, perform tasks efficiently. This model produces skilled workers, but wealth building requires completely different skill set. Understanding how money grows, multiplies, erodes, and moves through systems. You have to understand time value, risk pricing, and asset behavior across economic cycles. These are not abstract theories. They are the operating rules of modern wealth creation. Yet millions of people enter adulthood having never been taught how investment actually generates return, how inflation silently reduces purchasing power, how debt can build wealth or destroy it, how markets respond to global events. So people operate in one of the most powerful systems in human history without a functional map. And when you do not understand a system, your behavior inside it becomes reactive instead of strategic. Opportunity looks suspicious. Complexity feels threatening. Technical language feels intimidating. And something dangerous happens psychologically. Anything unfamiliar feels risky. Meanwhile, genuinely dangerous opportunities, scams, unrealistic promises, speculative traps often appear simple, fast, and emotionally appealing. So people avoid legitimate wealth building tools and sometimes fall into financial illusions instead. This is the true cost of financial illiteracy. Not just missed opportunities, but misdirected trust. And over time, this creates a population of hardworking individuals who participate in the economy but rarely shape their financial destiny within it. They earn, they spend, they save when possible, but they do not systematically build. And even when knowledge is eventually acquired, something else can prevent transformation, something far more subtle than ignorance. This takes us to number 8, comfort with mediocrity, the silent sedative. Extreme hardship creates urgency. Extreme success creates momentum. But there is a middle zone where neither pressure nor progress is strong enough to force change. This is the zone of manageable struggle. Life is not easy, but it is not unbearable. Bills get paid eventually. Needs are met most of the time. Problems exist, but they are familiar. And familiarity has a powerful psychological effect. Humans adapt quickly to repeated conditions. What once felt difficult begins to feel normal. What once felt temporary begins to feel permanent. Expectations slowly adjust downward. People stop imagining radically different futures and start focusing on maintaining present stability. Ambition softens into acceptance. Vision narrows into routine. Potential fades into practicality. And here is the most dangerous part. Nothing appears wrong on the surface. There is no crisis, no collapse, no dramatic failure. Just steady, predictable, limited progress, repeated year after year. Dreams rarely die from one major disappointment. They disappear through slow psychological negotiation with reality. Maybe this is enough. Maybe this is normal. Maybe this is how life is supposed to be. Or as we say in Nigeria, problems no dey finish. Once mediocrity feels stable, transformation begins to feel unnecessary. And when transformation feels unnecessary, growth stops voluntarily. Not because people cannot change, but because they no longer feel compelled to. And that quiet acceptance, more than any other external barrier, is what ultimately defines financial destiny for many in Africa. Now let's go to the real truth. None of these barriers operate alone. They interact, reinforce each other, multiply effects. Survival mentality limits planning. Black tax limits capital accumulation. Spiritual passivity limits strategic action. Consumerism limits investment. Currency instability limits preservation. Risk fear limits expansion. Education gaps limit understanding. Comfort limits urgency. Together, they form a powerful system. But systems can be understood, and anything understood can be changed. The question is not whether wealth is possible. The question is whether you are willing to see clearly, honestly, and without denial the forces shaping your financial reality. Because awareness is not comfortable, but it is the beginning of control. And once control begins, so does transformation. The next step is learning how to escape these traps strategically, because escape is possible, but only for those willing to think differently, act differently, and refuse to accept limitation as destiny. In the next video, we'll break down the practical paths Africans are using right now to build real wealth, even with limited capital. If you want to be a part of this, join by subscribing. Like, so that more people can get to see this, and comment. Let's start a conversation on how to build real wealth on our continent. See you in the next video.